Welcome to customizing forward engineering templates using ERwin Data Modeler r7.3. This new capability is available to you when you open an ERwin data model that's either physical or a logical physical model. You access the capability via the Tools menu item. And when you select that, you'll notice there's a new submenu called Forward Engineering Templates. Selecting this will open up a brand new dialog, the IDE, that contains 4 primary quadrants. The upper left are all the various templates available for customization. The lower left quadrant are the macros, and you can either use them or show additional documentation with a right mouse click. The upper right shows the template source code, the macro language, or the script, sometimes we would refer to it as. And the lower right is your expanded text in context of the object selected at the top of this dialog. You can switch from the object selected to another object of the same type simply by clicking on that object from the drop-down list, and then validate the expanded text in context of the new object. If an object you want to verify does not exist on the list, click on Show All, and every object within your model will then be available to you for selection via the drop-down. And now the new object can be reviewed in context. Let's take a look at how we configure the IDE to make it a little bit easier for our own individual workflow. To start with, the menu items are really not menu items, but rather icons. So we've tried to make this a bit more graphical for configuration, for find, replace, delete, new, save, open, and what have you. The first thing I'd like to do is actually show that we can toggle our macro categories, and rather than having a long list, an alpha list of macros, we now have macros associated with categories, something that may be more familiar with those of you that have worked with macros in the past. Additionally, we have icons associated with each macro to show its state, whether it's active, deprecated, discouraged, and what have you. Let's go ahead and look at our macro categories and see how we edit them. The first thing you'll notice in category view is that you have a list of all the macros, and those that are assigned to this category have check marks, and we can do this for each and every macro category that we have in the IDE. Additionally, we can add or subtract simply by clicking on the checkbox. In macro view, we have our alpha list of macros, and when we click on a macro, we'll see which category it is assigned to. So we can take a macro and assign it to one or more categories as necessary to, again, accommodate our workflow. We can create a new category, such as My Commonly Used Macros, and assign those macros that we wish into this new category as well. So we have a lot of ways of configuring and making the workflow a little simpler. When we go ahead and take a look at the template editor preferences, or the configuration menu, we see that we can adjust the colors, how things appear in the source and or expanded text windows. For instance, if we don't like green on white for comments, we can change that to a yellow text on a maroon background, making it a little bit easier for us to see because comments will now stand out quite well. In this editor, we can also select those macro categories that we do not wish to see. We can exclude them from the editor, as well as those macros that are discouraged and or deprecated. Makes it easier to work with. Let's see how we make and validate changes in the new FE IDE. The first thing you've probably noticed is that the template source quadrant makes quite a bit of use of the new scripting macros. So we're going to have to look around until we actually find the code we want to modify. In this case, it's going to be the create table statement. I'm going to insert a literal between the words create and table. The words will be my new. So it should read create my new table. Once I've made the change, the expanded text quadrant will automatically reflect in real time that change. So if I scroll back up to the front, I can see the net effect right there on screen. Create my new table, call record. Well, that's great, but what happens if I want to see how it affects a different table? So I'm going to go back up, select a different object, a different table object from my drop-down list, and again validate the change. Create my new table, credit card. This is exactly what I want, and now I'm able to move on to the next step. Okay, so let's begin making some more extensive changes. Now before I do that, I'm going to start by creating a new template that I can use as a working area. So I'm going to call this template CNB Create Table. And I'm going to add some new text into this template. I'm going to start with a simple comment to identify it. I'm going to call it, my new create table template. Sounds simple enough. Now, I don't like to type, so I'm going to cheat a little bit here by pasting in some already prepared syntax into my template source window. And that template source is a fairly simplistic create table statement, but what it does is it changes the formatting and aligns columns. I now have my column names, my data types, and my null options all lined up. Having seen that, I'm going to complete this template by adding in an end of statement macro. Right? I go click on that from my forward engineering macros, select use, and now there it is. I've got my go statement and even some code that does not get generated when we go to schema gen that shows EOS end of statement. Now let's see how this works with a different object. So changing to a different object, in this case I'm now looking at my customer table. It looks pretty darn good. So I think I've got what I want, but let's just verify it one more time. Different object. Let's select, in this case, product. So again, I'm going to verify the result, and there's my product table. The DDL looks exactly what I'm expecting it to be. So I think I've got what I need here. I'm going to verify it by going back up and selecting the create entity template just to verify what's there. And in this case, I happen to notice when I get back up to the top here of my expanded text window that the create table statement actually has an owner name, or what we call a schema associated with the table. Not quite what I have in my template. So let's see the code that's being used, and sure enough, there's some macro code, and this macro code right here looks like it's probably adding in that schema name. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to copy this again onto the clipboard with a Control-C. I'm going to scroll on down to my template code, and I'm going to then insert it. So let's find CNB. It's under miscellaneous. There we go. CNB create table. And I'm going to try to place this in the right place. And I think it probably needs to go right here before this backslash and before this carriage return. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my cursor and put in the text with a Control-V, and I'm going to validate my expanded text, and well, it's not quite right. So let's go ahead. I see I've got my product table name twice. Get rid of the original code that I used to put the table name in, which is property name. Delete that, and now verify that this change gives me what I want, and it does. Exciting. Well, I've got to make some additional changes now, but before I can, what I really want to do is find out what quoted name is, and I'll find that under this, in this category, uncategorized macros. So I'm going to find quoted name, right click, show more information, and this is how we can work with the documentation while we're in the IDE environment without having to leave, without having to open up PDF or any other external document. Okay, so let's close this and let's prepare our code for actual schema generation. Okay, in order to do this, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to create again a new template where I can preserve the original create entity source. So I'm going to call it saved create entity. Okay, it's a fairly unique name, I think. And I'm going to go select the original source code from create entity and copy it in to my new template. So I'm going to highlight everything, Control A, cut it to the clipboard, Control X, and then I'm going to scroll on down to our new template called Save Create Entity, right? And paste it in, Control V. Okay, having done that, let's move our new code by selecting it, Control A, copying it to the clipboard, Control C, and pasting it into Create Entity where it needs to be for schema generation. The code, I'm going to just take one last look and make sure it looks right. It does. So now let's save the entire template. I'll give it a new name. I'm just going to stick new in front of SQL Server 2005, and we're ready for schema generation. Okay, let's now look at how we select and use our custom FE template during schema generation. Let's go into FE. And you'll notice right away that I've got a prepared option set, custom option set called Basic Table Gen. And what it really does is turned off everything except the table schema component for generation. So I can really focus on the changes we've made. I'm also going to filter my tables down to the one we were working with in the IDE, the customer table. Let's preview the code and take a look at the original template. I can see a create schema statement followed by a create table statement. So let's now employ our custom template. We're going to select the browse button, point to new SQL Server 2005, and open the template. Having done that, I can now click on the preview button to see if this gives me what I really want. Okay, I've got my create table in nice formatted columns, so the create table statement looks good, but the create schema statement is not in the right place. It comes after create table, not where I want it. So let's go ahead and close this and go back into the editing environment, the IDE, by clicking on the edit button here. We don't have to exit schema gen, and try to figure out why things are not in the right place. So let's go back and find our saved create entity code, the original code, and well, there's an error, but that's explainable because remember, we filtered our table down to a specific object, one object. So this object will not generate. So let's go find our customer table and select that from the drop-down list here and move on. Yep, there we go. Okay, we've got expanded code. If we take a look at the expanded code, you'll notice there's a line prior to create table, the create table statement. And this is what we refer to as bucket code. This bucket code is produced with a forward engineering macro, a bucket macro, and what it does, as you'll see, is it helps us sort the information being generated from the script processor into an appropriate sequence. Okay, so this is probably what the error is, I'm hoping. So let's go ahead and close the documentation. Let's copy this bucket code, Control C, from the original source for create entity and move it into our custom code. And I've got a line 2 that happens to have a blank right there before create table, so I'm going to just paste it in, Control V. And if I look at my expanded code, sure enough, I've got my bucket code. So let's save the template change. We're going to keep the name New SQL Server 2005 and take a look at how this generates now. Click Preview, and sure enough, the template code is giving me what I want. The create schema statement first, the create table statement follows. It's formatted the way I need it. It's exactly what I want, and this is the template that I can use for all my schema generation needs. Okay, so you've seen how you do this. Good luck and happy customizing.